Welcome back to Driving and Dragons. I'm Daniel, and I'm here today with a bit of a reaction to Generic Ginny D, who has apparently put a new deck of cards and book on the shelves at places like Barnes and Noble, probably under the umbrella of her masters over at Wizards of the Coast. This is designed to enhance your 5e game. We're going to take a look at it and kind of assess how things are. I'm going to try and be as fair as possible with her, but as usual, what I expect from Ginny D is things that range from bad ideas up to the generic, because that's why I call her Generic Ginny D. Generally, she does give a fair amount of decent advice and decent insight into some of these games and into some game situations, specifically 5e, but it's always in a very generic way. And I don't mean generic in the sense that it's just universally applicable or that it can be easily adapted to a lot of different situations and that it's not very specific. I mean generic in the fact that it's extraordinarily commonplace. It's the kind of stuff you find everywhere. It's not anything new and exciting that's groundbreaking or that nobody ever thought of before. But let's have a look and see what she's got in her card game enhancement product. Now, on the 280ZX, I pulled the distributor and just in a complete fuck my life moment, I stripped out most of the screws, trying to get them off the distributor when I was dismantling the thing. I could still get them out. I could drill out the screws that the head stripped on. It's 40 years old, and getting some of the stuff off is a pain in the butt. But I'm starting to look at this and think that just dropping 160 or so on a new distributor is probably the way to go. I've already replaced the rest of the ignition system. I may as well go ahead and replace the distributor as well. Then everything's brand new, and it's not really going to be that big of a cost difference when you take into account some of the things I'm probably going to have to replace in the process of taking these busted screws out. So first off, I have seen part of this video. Double D had an impromptu stream last night, and he covered some of it, and I have looked through it. And there's some things that I agree with, some things that I kind of disagree with him on what he had to say about it. For the most part, he and I are simpatico. I might be a little bit more aggressive than him when it comes to my distaste for Ginny D, though I believe he may have a little bit less grace for her than I do. But let's have a look and see what we got going on.
In just over 2 months, a D&D supplement that I wrote will be for sale in this store, and stores like it all over. Barnes & Noble, Target, Indigo for the Canadians.
This is where it'll live. It's part of this Game Masters book series.
I'm competing with, like, real stuff, you know? But how cool would it be if I went in and something that I wrote was on the big table up front?
I wrote a deck of cards to help make your D&D games more epic, and it's going to be in real, normal people stores, like Barnes & Noble. So next time you walk into a Target to buy batteries and then black out and come to in the parking lot with $200 worth of home goods, this might be one of your poor financial decisions.
So we have yet to determine just how poor of a financial decision buying a Ginny D product is. I'm leaning towards it probably being a pretty bad decision, but I will say this. She says, I wrote. I'm going to give the grace on this that maybe she did, but I have a feeling that what this is the Generic Ginny D somewhat inspired product that was already there and already ready to go, that they just kind of slapped her on top of. I do take a little bit of umbrage with her being in the Games Master series, because I've seen a couple of the books that are in the quote-unquote Game Master series at Target. And looking through it, I'm like, none of these people are what I would consider game masters or people who should really be looked up to as, you know, writers and designers. Most of them are people who are just straight up generic 5e hacks, writing stuff that most of us have known since day one.
But I'm not here to brag. Well, I'm kind of here to brag, but I'm mostly here to explain what this deck is and how it actually works to make your players feel like heroes and make your games feel dramatic and epic. I've been playing D&D for around 6 years now, but I came to tabletop gaming from a background as both a fiction writer and a lifelong bookworm.
Fiction writer. What has she ever written? I mean, maybe she is. Maybe she's got a whole stack of stuff she wrote that just never got published. But I press X to doubt. I think she's a fiction writer in that it's a complete work of fiction that she's a writer. That being said, this is one of those things where she kind of deserves to brag. Hey, you're on the shelf, you're published, you're in major mainstream outlets. And the thing about it is that means she's already making money off of it, because when you have that kind of mainstream traditional publishing, you're not getting paid off of the book sales that come off the shelf. You're getting paid off of those orders from Barnes and Noble to buy X numbers, whether they sell or not. Now, if you can't get them off the shelf, then they're not going to reorder and you're not really going to make that much. But she's already making her money, and she's in a place where a lot of us always wish we could be. And I'm going to tell you right now, I mean, I ain't seen Shadow Dark on a Books A Million or a Barnes and Noble shelf.
One of the staple lessons that you learn in writing workshops is that in order for a reader to invest emotionally in the story, it needs to have stakes. Or a really hot love interest, if book talk is anything to go by. I carry that same lesson into tabletop games. The lesson about stakes, I mean. The highs should be high, the lows should be low. When you're stepping into a world of epic adventures, you want your triumphs to feel powerful and glorious. And in order for those triumphs to feel meaningful, there also need to be real consequences for failure.
Okay, everything she just said is true. Now, granted, once again, generic baseline stuff. That's 100% true. But the funny thing is that methinks that thou must be a hypocrite here, because that is not what 5e promotes. First off, how do you have any trouble making your characters feel epic in 5e when they're intentionally designed to be epic? First level characters are already so far above and beyond 90% of the world's population, unless you have specifically designed a game world to be populated by player characters and more advanced monsters, that the epic is kind of already built in. You start there. You start as a superhero, essentially. But the other side of this, too, is D&D 5e makes it so hard to actually die and makes it so easy to get away from negative consequences and to overcome them and to adjust out of them, that it really, stakes don't matter unless the stakes stick. And I seriously doubt her card deck is going to have stakes that really stick around for that long.
Find, especially once you reach higher tiers of play, that rewards and punishments both can easily start to feel underwhelming. You reach a point where magic items just don't carry the same excitement as they used to, and where any punishment short of death is either trivial or tedious.
She kind of just made my point there. And a lot of this also comes from the 5e player style, if you will. These game masters are out here dumping piles of magic items on characters at level 2, 3, 4, and 5. I used to run 3.5e games with the kind of unwritten house rule that you weren't going to see a magic item until you were 6th or 7th level. And when you got to 6th or 7th level, you were getting +1 sword, 1 for the whole party. You might pick up a +1 shield later on, or some potions and consumables, maybe like a bag of holding or something. This 5th or 6th level. 5e, and I guarantee you sit down in a Ginny D run game, you are dripping with magic swag that is well above the plus. You're throwing the +1 weapons away into the sell this in town bin by 2nd or 3rd level with Ginny.
Enter the Game Master's deck of Boons and Banes. I wrote this deck as a tool to help you provide big, dynamic experiences for your players, good and bad. Here's how it works. It's a deck of 40 cards, 20 boons and 20 banes. Boons are rewards that give your player characters new abilities, and banes are punishments that impose limitations on them.
Okay, so here's one of the places where I'm going to disagree with Double D. I guess he's kind of tongue in cheek and kind of just being a smart ass when he put out, it's like, oh, she has to explain what Boons and Banes are. Well, there was a point in time where me and Double D and everybody else, the basic expert, OGGM, the chick who wrote Shadow Dark, the guys over at Modifius, we all had to have these things explained to us at one time or another. In the game book that I'm writing for my system, I'm trying to peel back and be very careful to explain everything on a rudimentary level, to the point that I have a reader who has never played or had an interest in playing any kind of tabletop role-playing game, just to read through my rule book and let me know what his thoughts are on it, and let me know if he can understand the mechanics and how the game is put together, because I want it to be something that can appeal to everybody, including new players. So I don't really see that as any kind of drawback, and giving the grace to Double D, I think he was just kind of poking fun at her, and the fact that that's generally her entire fan base. I am also going to disagree with him a little bit on the artwork. Is it super inspiring? No. But is it incredibly generic? No. I think that this artwork is perfectly fine. It's good quality artwork. It delivers the message, like she has right here on the screen now, the gallows haunt. It shows you an idea of, a haunted gallows. It kind of looks like what one would be. Arcane Absorber kind of gives you the idea that somebody's getting hit by magic and presumably sucking it in. It's not super inspiring. It's not the kind of thing you look at and you're sucked into the story. But, in honest, that should be kind of the game master's job.
All the cards have the same back, so you can use them as a deck for the purpose of random draws if you want to. On the front, there's a beautiful piece of original art by Tim Foley, who absolutely killed it, by the way, and the name of the boon or bane. All the actual information about each card is found in the companion book. This is so that you can actually use the physical cards at the table without spoiling any information that you want to keep secret from players. So the cards are player facing and the guidebook is GM facing. Each card has 3 elements: effects, scaling tips, and side quests. The effects include a flavor description of the boon or bane and also the mechanics of how it works in gameplay. Scaling tips suggest how to reduce the impact of each card if your player characters are below level 10, since as written, these are intended for higher level play. And each card includes 2 related side quests that you might decide to use in order to weave the boon or bane into your narrative.
No, that's not anything spectacular, but that is a good way to do it. Probably the most important thing out of that whole group is that she said, oh, there's scaling tips to bring it back below level 10. You kind of need that, because statistically some 95 or 93% of all Dungeons and Dragons games never make it past level 8. So when you create things for higher level play, a lot of times if you don't have a way to scale it back, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. That may even be why she's got this kind of publishing deal that went into it. Be a smart move on her part from a marketing perspective, because she's going into an environment where she's not going to have a tremendous amount of competition, because most mass-produced, most commercially produced adventures and supplements are going to be balanced and geared towards that upper single-digit levels, that's 5 to 10 level range, because that's where most games end up being played. So scaling it back, definitely a good idea. And, it's got some quest ideas in it, which I think is a good idea. Unfortunately, a lot of materials, even a lot of really good materials, don't include things like, hey, here's great examples of how to use this in your game. I've always kind of wondered why it is that those are left out. Yes, a game master needs to have some creativity, needs to adapt some things, but there's no reason there shouldn't be some examples and some breakdowns of, hey, here's some ideas.
For boons, the side quests are implied to happen before the boon is granted, so you do the quest and are rewarded with the boon. For banes, the side quests are undertaken to remove the bane, so you get the bane and then do the side quest to get rid of it. I feel like this will make more sense in the context of an actual card, so let me show you an example. This is a boon called Arcane Absorber. First, we get a little flavor description of the character developing a hunger for the arcane. You can now absorb magic used against you and use it for your own purposes. Then we get into the mechanics. Basically, if somebody targets you with a spell and hits, you can use your reaction a few times per long rest to nullify the effects of the spell and gain temporary hit points. The higher the spell level that targeted you, the more temp HP you get. You can either use those as temp HP, allowing them to pad out your hit point total, or you can choose to release the stored magical energy as an explosive burst.
So this is what I come to expect from Generic Ginny D and the 5e player base. Arcane Absorber, you may as well just call this Arcane Game Breaker. I can just decide after you cast a spell and after you hit me with it, more or less as a free action, as a quote-unquote reaction, to absorb your spell, completely negate its effect, turn it into a benefit to me for temporary hit points, or use it to lash back out at you. So when I hit you with my Finger of Death or my Disintegrate spell, and you just suck it into HP, or you turn around and blast me back with it, and you get to do this multiple times, not just multiple times per day, because this is 5th edition, multiple times per long rest, which for 5th edition players means multiple times per encounter, because you know that's how they play the game. Anytime something tough happens, it's like, oh, let's get our Darren's Entrance Fortress out, or our rope trick, or whatever the hell we do to, make ourselves a little bachelor pad here in the middle of this damn dungeon so we can long rest right outside the next encounter's door. Just not well thought out. I don't know why this was a good idea. That is not a balanced mechanic at any level, in any way, unless it is far more restricted, even at higher levels. And at lower levels, it's just ridiculously overpowered.
Specific details about this card are written out in the guidebook, by the way. Game masters don't have to do any homebrewing. The mechanics are ready to use. But if your players are below level 10, or if you just want to make the boon less powerful, there's a suggestion for how to scale the effect down. In this case, by reducing the number of temp HP granted by this ability. Finally, there are 2 side quest suggestions. These are very loose, just a starting point for.
How does that make this any less powerful? Let's just put this out here. You're already in 5th edition, where it's damn near impossible to die in the first place. Temporary hit points are not that big of an advantage to start with. This ability, this boon, is more or less only going to be used to reflect magic back at the caster. This is used to fire, 6d10 damage back at the lich who tried to disintegrate you. It's not used to get temporary hit points, except in maybe some extreme situations. So reducing the amount of temporary hit points you get is not a good scaling mechanism. But it is the kind of thing that I expect from the 5e crowd. And let's be honest here, Double D pointed this out, and he's absolutely right. The chances that Ginny D put a tremendous amount of work into the development of these mechanics is pretty slim. It's almost certain that this was at least 60 to 70% ghost written with her added to it.
GMs. For example, one of the Arcane Absorber quests begins with the PC being hunted by a Spirit Naga. I learned about Spirit Nagas while writing this card. They're basically evil, immortal snake wizards. And no, you can't use that as a band name. I'm using that as a band name. If you track the Spirit Naga to its lair and defeat it, you're granted the Arcane Absorber boon.
Okay. Got to stop on this one, man. She's making me stop a lot on this one. I get it. Nobody's going to know everything about every piece of D&D history. And you're going to have some things that are kind of lost to the annals of time. For instance, I may not really expect a pure 5e player to know about the Caves of Chaos in Keep on the Borderlands from all the way back in Basic. Or, for instance, I'm a huge proponent of the Penumbra games modules like Thieves in the Forest and 3 Days to Kill that came out in the early days of 3rd edition under the OGL, because they're so fantastic. But if you don't know what 3 Days to Kill is, that doesn't really surprise me. However, you're talking about a Spirit Naga, which is the key figure in one of the top 10 D&D adventures of all time. And it is coming from somebody who is supposed to be something of an expert or a quote unquote influencer in the Dungeons and Dragons community. Not having ever heard of a spirit naga before after playing for 6 years and being this heavily invested in the D&D community specifically, and not knowing what a spirit naga is kind of along the same lines as not knowing what Castle Ravenloft is, not knowing who Tracy Hickman is, or not knowing who Gary Gygax is.
Or at least that's one way you could use this card. But this is meant to be a flexible tool, so I encourage you to use them however suits your game. For example, maybe your wizard decides to ask for help from their old mentor before a major battle. Their mentor was once an immensely powerful mage, but they're growing too old to join the party on a dangerous adventure. So instead, they help by performing an arduous ritual to grant the power of the arcane absorber to their student. Or maybe your party is exploring a ruin that was once a magical laboratory, and one PC in particular decides to make a risky move and test out one of the mysterious arcane devices on themselves. Will they be rewarded for taking a chance, or will they regret it? You could take the Arcane Absorber boon and the Arcane Allergy Bane, have the player draw at random, and let fate decide. These are all thematic examples where you're matching the theme of the card to the story of the game. But of course, some random chance can be a lot of fun too. Maybe your cleric has completed a hugely difficult mission at the behest of their deity, and now it's time for their divine reward. So you fan out the entire set of 20 boons and let them draw one at random. You can have as much or as little control as you feel comfortable with. Now,
she picked a bad example there. I get what she's going for. It's not a bad point. But unless you're doing some sort of dualistic deity situation where there's like a good god and an evil god, and that's really about it, or there's like one god for each point of the alignment compass, where these gods have massive overreaching portfolios, your god's boon or curse or bane should never be generic. It should never be completely random. Maybe you pick out every one that kind of fits with that god's portfolio and let them randomly select out of that. But it shouldn't be everything, because you're going to have benefits that are just antithetical to whatever that god's portfolio is. For instance, you're not going to have somebody who is a cleric of Nerul who gets some kind of benefit that has to do with granting life and healing, because that doesn't fit Nerul.
let's look at an example of a Bane card. These cards contain the same information as boon cards, effects, scaling tips, and side quests, but there are some slight differences in how they're used, and in how likely your players are to say yes when you ask them to drive you to the airport next week. This Bane is called Unseen Pursuer. First, the flavor. The character is suddenly convinced that they're being followed. They keep catching sight of an indistinct figure out of the corner of their eye, but can never quite pin it down. Oh, Ginny, where do you get inspiration for these cards? I have anxiety, thanks for asking. Then we go over the mechanics.
Nobody asked. Nobody asked. Please quit taking your self-diagnosed, weak sauce, quote-unquote mental issues and turning them into virtue points. It's disgusting, and it needs to stop. And it's an insult to everybody who truly struggles with these kind of things. People who overcome don't feel the need to constantly tell people they're overcoming. And they sure as hell don't turn their mental problems into some sort of virtue signaling, social points badge like this. And it's just a disgusting trend that needs to stop. I'm going to get off my soapbox because that has nothing to do with these cards or this video, but I really hate it when she does that crap.
This fear keeps them up at night, forcing them to make a con save with every long rest or toss and turn all night, taking a level of exhaustion. When they go into combat, they can practically feel the unseen pursuer breathing down their neck. They have to save against being shaken by its presence, and if they fail, a 1d6 penalty is applied to their attacks and saves. To scale this card, you just tweak the saving throw DCs. Now, the side quests are where the biggest differences are between Boon and Bane cards. Let's be honest, these Banes are pretty nasty. You don't want to play with these for very long.
I was actually just about to point out, it's funny how much more balanced the Bane is. That, as a rule, is an annoyance and is something that can have an effect. It's meaningful enough that you do want to get rid of it, but doesn't cripple your character completely. And yet she speaks about it as if it's some massive problem. This is your issue with the modern player base right here. You look at something like her arcane absorber Boon as somehow being just a cool thing to give a high level character, and it's completely game breaking and way overpowered. And then you treat something that's really I'd call it a moderate drawback, and you treat it like it's the worst thing ever, because God forbid you ever have something negative attached to a character. Otherwise, they're just going to throw a hissy fit because you destroyed my character. You made my character worthless because he now gets -2.
The quest hooks are the player's way out. Complete the quest to eliminate the Bane. The quest hooks on the Boon cards are more or less interchangeable, just two different options, so game masters can pick what appeals to them. But the quest hooks on the Bane cards fall into two distinct categories. One is a way to end the Bane, and the other is a way to transfer it to a different target. There's two reasons I think this is fun. First, while a Bane is a limitation for the player, allowing them to use it against their enemies turns it into a tool, which I think is neat. And
there you go. Let's take our negative and make sure that we can use it to our advantage, because we can't have anything purely negative that's a detriment to the character. Absolutely cannot just give them the short end of the stick.
second, if your table enjoys a little moral quandary, this will introduce one. Not only is it crappy to saddle someone with one of these Banes, but the process of transferring it is something that should feel kind of bad to do. In this case, the transfer quest requires you to place a specific item near where the target sleeps and then prevent them from sleeping for 3 straight days. Like, that's basically torture. And also, that's why I'm pretty sure human babies are chaotic evil. I'm making a PowerPoint. We'll talk about it later. But
yeah, I agree with Double D. There's some of her bullshit pro-abortion crap. Yeah, babies are chaotic evil. This is ridiculous. But, at least we don't have to worry about anybody ever knocking her up.
if that kind of move isn't right for your table, you can always just stick to the side quest that eliminates the Bane completely. In this case, you can eliminate the unseen pursuer by making contact with it and learning that it was once a living person affected by this same Bane. If you can track down the body and give it a proper burial, it will leave you alone. Again, that's one way you can use this card, but it could be used in a million other ways too. Like, maybe you already have a player character in your game who is being tracked or hunted by a powerful being. This Bane might be the escalation of that feeling of being hunted to create urgency or ramp up the drama before a final confrontation. Or maybe your players were poking around in a dungeon or a ruin and one of them threw caution to the wind and opened the wrong door or looked into the wrong enchanted mirror, releasing some trapped spirit that now haunts them. Basically, I've provided the card's effects, but you're the one who gets to decide when and where and how to apply them. I could recite a laundry list of ideas on how these can be used. A warlock patron's reward after completing a request, a mysterious vendor selling a random card draw, divine retribution for performing a deeply evil act. There's no right or wrong way to use these cards. They're for you. Do whatever you want with them. But Ginny, you might be asking, I'm afraid that slapping an individual player with a Bane is going to make them feel unfairly targeted. Or on the flip side, maybe granting one a boon is going to feel like favoritism to the other players. What a great question. You are so smart and so nice, and if you don't mind me saying, you have really good taste in YouTube channels. And I think you're absolutely right to consider how these kinds of powerful abilities or punishments are going to feel when pointed at just one character in a larger party. My best tip, don't make it a surprise. Whether it's a boon or a bane, players should know that something big is at stake.
That is terrible advice. That's horrible advice. It probably should be a surprise. First off, the response to those questions is life isn't fair, and neither is life in the game. Sometimes your character gets the +5 Vorpal sword, and they're the sword user. And the wizard has to say, well, damn it, I didn't get a +5 Vorpal sword. Sometimes you find the Staff of the Magi, and the fighter gets to be left out. It happens. Sometimes the Dragon's Breath weapon just so happens to be of an elemental type that doesn't really bother the wizard because he has the right spells to absorb it, or the rogue because they have armor that absorbs it, but it torches another party member. Everything does not have to be evenly handed out. And there's some merit to this mechanic that she's built into these cards, probably because it's a mechanic that's been used 100,000 times in 100,000 different ways by 100,000 GMs before her. But surprise is a big part of it. She's even contradicting herself because she says earlier in the video things like, oh, they messed around with a magic item and, decides to test it by using it on themselves in this ancient laboratory. And you could have them pick one of the two cards and one's the boon, one's that's a surprise that affects one character. Not a thing that everybody gets. But it comes from taking that risk. It is either a reward or a penalty for doing something risky. It's called gambling for a reason. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But you can't sit there and be like, okay, well, if you do these things, I'm going to give you a chance to say, oh, one of these could be good, one of these could be bad. They could both be bad, or they could both be good. The player not knowing is a big part of what the fun of the mechanic would be. And she's basically undermining one of the more effective parts of her own mechanic with this modernist bullshit where you have to make sure everybody has their fee-fees intact at the table.
And then they should make the decision of whether or not to engage with it. If your party travels deep into an ancient cursed tomb, past warnings written in blood and deadly traps, and the barbarian still decides to sit down on the throne made of skulls, I am of the opinion that a Bane is fair game at that point. They had every indication that they were messing with something dangerous, and they decided to be reckless with it.
Somebody needs to take her through the Tomb of Horrors and run it right so that she can understand that it's like, you don't need a whole bunch of warnings. Just don't do stupid shit and start approaching the game as a player as you would an instance in real life. I never had a character who was injured by the Sphere of Annihilation in the Tomb of Horrors. You know why? Because I never went into it and said, gee, I would shove my arm into this unforeseen black pit hole that I have no way of knowing what's inside. I would never do that. Why would my character ever do that? But unfortunately, these modern players go in with the idea of, well, I have such and such saves and rolls, so I can go ahead and reach in there and see if there's something cool. Well, what do you mean I don't get a save or a roll? Why are you sticking your fucking dick in the Sphere of Annihilation, moron? You have no idea what's in there. It's like the world's worst glory hole.
Likewise, if your cleric has been dedicated to their deity's cause, even when the rest of the party had their heads turned by big bags of gold or the promise of power, it will feel fair for that dedication to be rewarded with a divine gift. In short, either a big reward or a big punishment needs to feel justified in the context of the story. And this is true with or without the deck of Boons and Banes. Now, as with any rule, once you know it, you can break it. I am not by any means saying that a Boon or Bane card can never work well as a complete surprise. I'm just saying you need to read the room. In my home game right now, my player character Penelope is actively trying to break her father out of a deal with a demon lord. She's already been warned in a dream that the demon lord is aware of her meddling. This would be a great opportunity for a Bane. If I insist on continuing to defy this immensely powerful and dangerous being, there should be real consequences for that. But it's also worth noting that I am that kind of player, the kind who enjoys the drama of the negative as much as the positive. I've always expressed this to my game masters. I'm the player that's like, come on, me up, do it. I mean, that's why I always carry a sword, in case I need to make any bad decisions. But not everyone is like that. So some of this is also just about communicating and understanding what your players want. This deck is a tool, and like any tool, it can be misused. When in doubt, just ask your players how they feel. It really is that easy. Okay, Ginny, you might be saying, I'm convinced. I'm gonna go to Target right now and buy this deck, and also $150 worth of storage bins and fun throw pillows. Well, unfortunately, it is not at Target yet because it doesn't come out until October 1st. It is, however, available for pre-order. I'm gonna be totally real with you. There is no incentive for you to pre-order. It's not cheaper, you don't get any bonus items, there's no benefit that you get from ordering it now versus just picking it up in October. In fact, if you aren't sure you even want it, you might be better served by waiting until it's out and reading reviews and seeing what people think of it. Of course.
Well, there's a piece of unexpected self-deferential honesty in old Jenny D's thing. Hey, you don't get anything special out of this out of pre-ordering it. It actually would negatively impact her because pre-orders are something that publishers do take a strong look at in most cases. But hey, you don't get anything special out of this. Maybe you should wait for reviews and stuff. Whether it's genuine or not, let's go ahead and give props for basically coming out and saying, hey, this may be my product and I benefit from it, but maybe it's not for everyone.
Of course, I think it's great. I wrote it, but I could be wrong. It could be terrible. There's really only one reason to pre-order the deck, and that is generosity. You want to support me as a game writer. With big stores like Target and Barnes & Noble, pre-orders are data that tell them how popular the item is going to be. If an item gets a lot of pre-orders, they might be like, oh, this item is popular. We should order a lot of them, and maybe shelve them in a prominent place. And the difference between this deck being stocked on a shelf versus, say, on an end cap could be a difference of thousands of sales, especially considering how many of these stores exist across the US. And for smaller stores like your local game store, pre-orders might actually be the determining factor of whether or not they stock this item at all. I know that within the tabletop gaming space, I have some name recognition. I'm considered something of a big fish, but within the world of the stuff that's stocked at Target, I am the smallest possible fish. Oh, that's way better than Evil Immortal Snake Wizards. I'm changing my band name. I will put a link in the description where you can pre-order the deck from major sellers in the US and Canada. I have also heard from you guys that a lot of your local game stores and bookstores have this item available for pre-order, so it's worth a quick search, especially if you're outside the US. But also, once the deck is officially out, I will stock it in my own shop, and I ship basically everywhere. So
all right, I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I really care about her shipping and how to get her items and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. She could reach out to local game stores and small shops and maybe say, hey, I can put this in your shop and maybe I'll do something. Maybe she could say, hey, look, if you stock this, I'm going to do a live appearance at 10 stores that stock my stuff. If you buy a certain number of them, you're entered to win. Yes, it's a little bit of self-serving marketing, but it is a way to give back to the small local game store that, kind of helps keep the hobby alive in a lot of ways and kind of humanizes the YouTube personality a bit. But, that's just me. That's just how I would think about it. But anyway, Jenny D's deck of many generic things. What do you think? Do you think this is worthwhile? Do you think that there's a lot of merit to this? Do you think that maybe we're being a little bit more harsh on it than we probably should be just because it's Generic Ginny? Let me know in the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe. See you guys next time.